Welcome to Higher Ground, a podcast that looks at the K12 leadership job market with a data-driven approach. Your co-hosts are Christina Greenberg, the CEO of Agility Search, who brings 2 decades of experience leading executive searches and meeting the talent needs of mission-driven organizations. And my name's Josh Czupryk. I founded Josh's K12 Jobs Blast and have been cataloging the K12 job market for the last 3 years. Now, stay tuned for today's pod. Hey, y'all. Welcome back. It's hard to believe that we're at episode 6. We are excited to join you to talk about the K12 leadership job market. And I'm Josh from Josh's K12 Jobs Blast.
Christina from Agility Search. Excited to talk with you again, Josh.
Absolutely. And today we're going to focus on high quality instructional materials, but more broadly, what are the resources and materials and the ways in which we're thinking about making the teacher and leader jobs sustainable so that communities are not feeling churn.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that we've alluded to in previous episodes, right, is the lack of sustainability in the role. But as you and I were just talking about before we started recording, I think there's some promise, right? There's some opportunity in leveraging these materials to take the load off of people who are having to create everything from scratch all the time. And even looking at technology, right? AI and other technologies that are coming and seeing how can we use those to be able to make things even better in classrooms and to make the job even more sustainable.
So yeah, today I'm taking my Jobs Blast hat sort of off. I'm going to keep it on, but really like my former chief academic officer hat is coming on and my nerding out. But the very brief history for listeners that may be new to HQIM is that really this came about when career and college standards became common with Common Core across the country. Common curriculum started to pop up. Then there was pushback. And of course, during COVID, when learning gaps were eliminated, we kind of went to a differentiation for all model. And now we're swinging back to saying having a core foundational base gives you a common language throughout a school and a system so that way students are not experiencing all new math terms every single year if they were at a K-8 school. And so today, my question I pose for you, Christina, is there's a lot of innovation that can happen with HQIM implementation, but there's also a lot of what people perceive as follow the script. I think when you all are looking for leaders and profiles of leaders, how do you balance innovation with the ability to also do the thing and run the play?
Yeah, I think you have to look at both. Right. So if I think about the competencies on, a leader or CEO scorecard that we're using to measure people, we're definitely looking at, there's always going to be a measure of academic performance if it's an academic job, right? Instructional knowledge, instructional expertise. That'll look different a little bit depending on the job. For some folks, it'll be really deep, that they have to be able to be in classrooms coaching teachers every day. And for some folks, it's really more a high level understanding of what the highest quality instruction looks like and what academic results need to be for kids and helping people get there. So there's a range, but I think there's always going to be that piece. And then there's also usually some kind of innovation, new ideas, new frontiers piece also that we're looking for. The way we measure those things can depend a little bit, and sometimes they're intersected. So sometimes we're looking for innovation in instruction and academics, or we're looking for someone who can take current instructional programming and make it more innovative. And sometimes they're going to be 2 separate things. But I do think that whether that's work samples, artifacts that people have already completed, tasks sometimes that we give them, or just at a finalist day, having them walk through classrooms with us and walk through schools and talk about what they see, right? And kind of reflect on what they might do or look at data and reflect what that might mean. So I think that we definitely can find it and test it in people. But I think this next 5 to 10 years are going to require a level of curiosity and experimentation that may be a little different than we've seen previously. We've talked about this before, but 10 years ago, it was, okay, here's the playbook, do the playbook, close your doors, leave community and parents out, leave everyone else outside and just do the thing, right? And I think we're the new frontier of learning. Kids are used to using technology in different ways. And I think with AI and things that are coming on, we're going to have a much more expansive view of these things. And I actually love your focus on high quality materials because I think those can be leveraged as the base that then innovation moves from.
Yeah, I think, so it's really interesting. My wife worked at Team Speed for a long time and they would support districts, right, in rolling out high quality instructional materials. And so in 2015, my 3-school charter network was somewhat of a guinea pig, right, where we were testing out, implementing expeditionary learning. When we were looking at EL, it was fascinating when I would watch teachers shift from you are asking me to read a script And I remember being like, there are 30 pages for the lesson. Like, there's too much for a script. This isn't a script. And then once they started being like, hey, do you mind that I just took this chalk talk and did it my way? I'm like, that's beautiful, right? Like, because then it's authentically you, but you're still using Esperanza Rising as your foundational text, and you're still using the same driving questions, right? But you're making it your own. And so I used to give teachers the analogy, if you were a surgeon, you wouldn't walk into a hospital and have to literally create all the tools for your surgery. The tools would be in a package and you would unpackage them as you prepared for surgery. HQIM in a lot of ways is the same as medical instruments or devices. You are simply leveraging them within your classroom to make the decisions that you need to make in order to support students. And so one thing that I'm excited about, to your point with AI, is I think having people realize that HQIM can be 80% of your instructional playbook, and it can take 80% of the cognitive load off of the leader in the classroom, the school, and the system. And then it really does let you have 20% to iterate on and play with and really make sure that it matches. And so I'm thinking, like, we've seen schools where AI, and to divert a bit, right? But we've seen schools where AI, the policy is there is an AI policy. I have seen a school district where it says the AI policy is that there is an AI policy. Great. And then we've seen like AI is banned, right? I don't know. Like you are a parent of a high schooler and a college kid. I'm a parent of a 8-month-old and an elementary kid. I'm sure we can come to this, but where do you think that the right balance in AI is for curriculum?
Yeah. So I'm, like you said, taking off your hat. I'm going to take off my professional hat and just my parent hat right now. Right. And it's so interesting. So yeah, my son is a freshman in college, and seeing throughout his high school journey, the introduction of AI and how it changed his experience and now his sister's experience, who's a sophomore, is really interesting. My daughter just had an English assignment where instead of writing an out of class essay, which would be a very typical 10th grade thing you would do, they wrote everything by hand in class. So the teacher knew it was their work. And then they typed it in class before they turned it in. I mean, it's a way for the teacher to know it's authentically their work. My daughter didn't really mind, but I was a little bit like, is that really what we should be doing? Is that really how we should manage it? Similarly, you hear of kids getting into trouble because they're copying and text from ChatGPT. Sometimes they're literally it is cheating, let's be honest, right? They're just using the AI. But sometimes they're actually going back and forth, using it as a thought partner in really creative and interesting ways. And I think my experience, again, this is totally personal, is that we don't usually have policies. And that was actually something I brought up with the teachers. I said, I think we need a policy for our kids, because my kids honestly don't know when it's okay or not okay to leverage it. And so they're just kind of figuring it out as they go. And they have their own integrity and their own sense of like what's honest and fair, and they're using that. But does that agree with what the teacher thinks? So I think that it's going to be the Wild West. It makes me think a little bit when the internet first came out. Do you remember? And we would all go online and we'd use it. I was in college. I think you're a little younger than me. You were probably in middle or high school. And like, I remember I would sit down at a computer and you were just like, oh my God, I can search anything on Google. This is amazing, right? And it was such a different time. And then at some point we realized, okay, we need to have some guardrails, right? We need to have some structure around what kids can access or not, and what is okay to search and not, and what public search engines at a library can access versus not, based on, guardrails. So I think there's going to be a little bit of that probably happening with AI too. But I would be sad if we threw it all out and made kids go back to anachronistic writing things by hand all the time, because I do think there are ways in which it can be an amazing thought partner and push us. And so I guess I would push us all to find those frontiers and those edges versus just defaulting to, okay, we're going to try and ignore it exists.
And admit, on air, I guess this is fun. But while I've been writing my dissertation, one of my advisors is an emeritus professor at the university who doesn't live in town anymore. But I took a directed writing course with her over the summer, and we were just cleaning up my dissertation. And she said, well, what did AI say about where to push you? And I said, I don't know. Like, I didn't use that. I'm waiting for a peer review. She goes, AI can be your peer review. So she emailed me 5 prompts to use for each chapter. She's like, hey, in chapter 1, these are the things we're looking for. Ask AI to read with this lens and to give you pointers, not to write it for you, but to give you where you should be tightening up. And then I was like, oh, I really want to hire an APA editor. She goes, okay, so that's like the perfect place, that instead of paying $1,000 to an APA editor, just say, give me every edit I need to make that makes APA style. It was just so, where I was like, well, I feel like I'm cheating. She goes, yeah, I mean, if you say, write my dissertation, A will know, right? Because it has no voice. But B, she's like, the thing it can do is great on a rubric, right? So let's give it a rubric, and let's say, by the time it gets to me, she's like, I want you to have gone through 2 or 3 iterations. But I pulled that back because I was on a school tour a few weeks ago and I was watching, I think it was an 11th grader hand type an essay, to your point. It's like, man, I haven't seen an essay hand typed in the wild in like years. I said, what is your AI policy? And that was when the principal joked, well, I leave it to teacher discretion because it's up to teacher comfort. But I am explaining to them, like, when they get to college and career, like AI is going to be a thing. And if we don't teach them how to use it appropriately, what does that mean? Well, I am curious. I want to get one more thought so like, let's say we move into a frontier where you're using high quality instruction materials as your base. We have common, language across kindergarten through 12th grade math and science. So that way kids aren't learning the same concept, but with very different phraseology every year. And we've adopted and we've implemented it, and we're placing a new CAO in one of our searches, right? What encouragement would you give that chief academic officer who's been selected about how to balance the use of AI to make the most of their HQIM?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is, to your point, be comfortable testing it and trying it in different ways, and try it as adults before we have kids do it. But, be comfortable. The second thing is to create policies that are really clear for kids. I think I know, again, like as a parent, my kids' own frustrations has been when they don't know what the guardrails are or the policies are. And so they feel like they might be getting into trouble. Your rubric example is a great one. Like last year, my daughter used it not to write her essay, but she had a summative long essay assignment, and she stuck the rubric into GPT and said, how can I make this assignment better? Which I think you and I would agree is probably a really good use of AI, right? So I think, but is that okay? Right? And what are the policies? I think really being clear about what our policies are that we're expecting people and allowing people to do. And then I think that being just comfortable with innovation and new ideas and not being scared off by it. In education, often we're really traditional and we can be really scared by new things because we have kids' lives in our hands and we worry about that. But I do think that we're going to have to test some boundaries. And I think folks are weary, right? You think about the blended learning revolution that never really came 10 years ago, and then we thought it was going to come again, COVID, right? And so folks, I totally get that educators are like, not another innovation, like enough with you, I'm done. But I think it is going to be a really transformative event in all of our lives. And so we need to be comfortable trying new things. So I'm curious, Josh, I would love you to set up a little bit our guest for today, because it's very closely related to this topic. And I know you were really excited to talk with them.
Yes, my nerd hat was totally on. I'm not calling our guest a nerd. I was a nerd. But Eric Hirsch is the CEO of EdReports, and I always used EdReports to verify instructional materials. But they are the folks who really evolved with the green, yellow, red for curriculum. The curriculum companies either loved or hated to see them coming because they were just an umpire who called balls and strikes. So Eric and I talk about HQIM, how we've seen it evolve over the last 15 years, and then specifically his thoughts on how he thinks that AI is going to allow teachers to better leverage the materials and make it their own. So I'm excited for people to stay tuned.
Me too. All right. Well, we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thanks, Josh.
Awesome. Thanks. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the second part of today's pod. I am honored to introduce Eric Hirsch, who is CEO of EdReports, and quite frankly, one of our nation's leading subject matter experts in terms of what makes high quality instructional materials high quality. He is also a friend of our families. And so I was like, man, if we're having a conversation about the current state of K-12 leadership, we got to hear from the guy that thinks about the infrastructure that goes into supporting school systems and teachers. And so, Eric, thank you for taking time today.
Oh my gosh, Josh, thanks for having me, and getting to know your family through your lovely wife and through you is just amazing. So yeah, excited. Bring it on.
So I can't imagine that people who are listening are not familiar with EdReports, but if you had to give the 30-second elevator pitch for those who are just learning about you all, what would you say?
Sure. EdReports, largely led by amazing teachers, is meant to help schools, districts, and states identify the highest quality instructional material so they're empowered when they go and make choices, that they have great information about whether the right content in the right doses are present and how usable it is for their teachers.
I'm curious. So, we're just going to jump right into it. The teacher shortage is still real. I will say what I'm looking at in terms of all my data is that the interest in transitioning is still there for teachers, but we have a bit of a backlog in roles because federal funding has become in question. People are not hiring as robustly. But my prediction is that as soon as the market opens back up, like we will continue to see teachers transition. Given that, what role do you think high quality instructional materials play in a teacher's decision to either stay or go?
It's huge, largely because it impacts so many things. First and foremost, time. The average teacher without curriculum, if they are putting together lesson by lesson from Google, teachers pay teachers, one, what are the odds that you're going to get a great lesson once, let alone twice, let alone 4 times, let alone 150 days of instruction that is coherent, scoped and sequenced, and help kids get grade level content in ways that make a difference for them. Teachers spend 7 to 10 hours a week doing that. Teachers still spend a ton of time adapting their materials for kids, but it gives them a place to start. And when you think about the transition in teaching, the greatest gift we can give teachers is curriculum as a resource. So it is driving their professional learning. It's driving the conversations they're having at grades about how can we make this lesson come alive for kids and where kids are at, as opposed to curriculum has never been meant to be overly constraining for teachers. It's a resource. What teachers need is resources that give them a leg up and make the job more doable in a job that is largely undoable.
That's making me think. So we were talking a little bit before we started recording, just to reveal to listeners, but we were talking about this idea that we always talk about transitioning teachers, but leaders are also transitioning, especially after COVID. And part of the premise of the pod for people who've been listening is this idea that people got children and communities back into buildings, brick and mortar after COVID. And now that the adrenaline has started to wear off, people are tired and they're leaving superintendencies or charter school CEOs or school principal seats. We are seeing those roles filled and people are moving up, but we also talked about this, the baton handoff, right? This idea that one generation of leaders has a bit of a transition and can build a bench for the next generation. And that's not necessarily happening anymore. I wonder with such, I'm just going to say it, novice leaders taking the seats. Again, I think you previewed with in what ways curriculum can help, but I'd love for you to expand on that.
Yeah. First of all, curriculum is essential in making that connection in the instructional core between teachers and kids, right? This is the way we convey content to a kid. But think how important curriculum is for a school leader, an instructional leader, and them understanding, again, grade level content to support those teams. Think how important it is for a chief academic officer or superintendent as they select material to understand the instructional vision, to understand the deficiencies that may be there in curriculum and whether they may need or not need curriculum. How many leaders actually know what happens when that door is closed and when curriculum is utilized? Rand just put out a study that said the average teacher is using 2 core curriculum and 5 supplements on average per week. And curriculum use is really important, but you start that conversation by actually understanding the core content that's there in the materials, how it can be there to serve as that kind of spinal system to be used with integrity, not fidelity, with integrity, to really help drive instruction. And understanding how curriculum can drive instruction is not just for a teacher, but for a coach, for a principal, for district administration, and more states.
Sometimes I put my dad hat on and I'm just thinking about our 3rd grader. And he has a phenomenal teacher this year. I think they're using IM as their base curriculum and just one. And she's been doing 3rd grade 17 years. I mean, she's the best. But he's been coming home and I mean, he's just off to the races in math. And last year, I mean, he kept saying, I'm stupid in math in 2nd grade, all the things. And it was really, not to get so granular, right? But it was 3-digit subtraction. And it had gotten so procedural that he was like, well, no, I have to go next door to borrow. And then I have to go next door to take away. And then I have to go next door to give back. And then there will be a remainder. And I just was like, your little autistic brain is trying to remember like 17 rules. And to your point, once we really peeled the onion back, the teacher was using 7 materials. And I'm like, cool, there's different language in each material. And so a 2nd grader's brain can't hold on to that. So I love that connection there because I've seen it play out as a dad.
And good materials will help me your son where he is, right? And work on all aspects of rigor in math, conceptual understanding, application, fluency. And again, to expect teachers would do that lesson by lesson on their own, they need strong materials as a place to start. Then thinking about how your son learns, right? Curriculum doesn't teach kids, teachers do. But having curriculum as that resource that is scoped and sequenced gives them different ways of engaging with this content. So then they can start to think about their learners and customize, which is the magic teachers provide. That's really different than nothing. I mean, I remember when my son came home with a mimeograph sheet. I tagged it online. It was from the 1990s. I went and talked to the teacher, and they gave me a copy of their Ed Report's green-rated curriculum that was still in shrink wrap and said if I wanted to help my son in high school math, here I go. And he gave me a copy of the textbook that was never given to my kid.
How do we, so here's something that I'm going to pose to you with curriculum again, and just really from your 30,000 foot view of education writ large. I came from charter school world. I imagine a number of our listeners are at charter schools or have been at charter schools. And I started to equate it to an emergency room because when I went to a high performing, high growth school district, it almost felt like we were at orthopedic surgery. It was still very intense work, but the urgency was a bit calmer. And people were able to focus. It feels like it's a 5-alarm fire, and that's why leaders and teachers are sometimes leaving the exit of the chaos of an emergency room. What do you think we need to do as a sector to make the conditions where leaders and teachers could stay?
That is such a great question. I've been at Ed Reports over 11 years. But before that, for the previous 10 to 15, I actually surveyed educators on the teaching and learning conditions in their school. And it was amazing work, heard from 1.3 million teachers, gave data back to 30,000 schools so they could have data-driven conversation about things that could really influence what they could do in the classroom. We asked about teacher leadership, school leadership, time, facilities and resources, parental support, curriculum across the board. And I think there's a lot of conversations to be had about what are the conditions of success teachers need in a school and how are we really documenting them and attending to them. And I think you bring up the hardest part, which is post-pandemic with a lot of turnover, those things such as an atmosphere of trust and mutual respect, a fundamental belief that all kids can learn and the vision around the school supports that. Those are the things when I used to do that research, I found were most important to teacher retention. And they're the greatest challenge if you're seeing a cycle over and over again of principals that the school from my son that I mentioned, I'm so glad he's 24 now. The principal who started when he was a sophomore is still there. But before that, they had 4 principals in 5 years. And so again, how can you create conditions for success for kids without some of that stability? The one reason I love being in this curriculum space is curriculum can be one of those constants. It can be the resource that helps ensure that kids are getting access to grade level content, which sadly often does not occur.
Yes. I don't think I've said it on the pod, but with my wife writing the opportunity myth, right?
I mean, it was her compelling data that really helped us go in and make even more progress and have more impact. I can't believe the impact we've had in Ed Reports. A number of states, my gosh, more than 20 million kids are in classrooms in districts where they've used our report to pick curriculum, identifying the challenges of not having access to grade level content because teachers with the best of intentions found it hard to think about what would challenge their kids on a day-to-day in that scoped and sequenced way that could keep giving them access to keep them on the path towards college and career readiness. And Bailey found how infrequently that occurred. And again, I think having curriculum as one answer, not a silver bullet, and as part of that roadmap that keeps us clear on what it would mean to really get grade level content to kids, essential.
We're going to leave with, sometimes I feel like the conversation arc that I take people down this season can feel really pessimistic. But I think that there are cases for optimism. And so if somebody was listening and considering either going into school or system leadership for the first time or returning to school or system leadership if they've left, what would you tell them?
I want to start with the curriculum market for a second, because I'm a raging optimist when it comes to curriculum, which when we started at Ed Reports, we found 1 out of 19 things we reviewed had the grade level content and alignment to standards we look for, now over half. And when I look at AI, the potential for personalized learning, and some of the supports and what can be done, I am really excited about getting even better resources in the hands of teachers that help them reach more and more students. And post-pandemic, let alone pre-pandemic, reaching all students is such a challenge. And I think curriculum can be a really important lever. And when you think about that turnover and you think about teacher burnout, there are so many things to do to work on the conditions. But again, why so many teachers go in is that direct relationship with a kid and conveying content and the love of watching a kid learn and make progress. And I think if we figure out the technology, right, and we can do more to bring stability and sometimes get out of the way, and in other times hold teachers, hopefully it becomes the meaningful, doable job we all hope it can.
Well, we're going to leave it there for today. But again, Eric Hirsch, CEO of Ed Reports, and we'll put the link to Ed Reports in the show notes. So thankful that you took time today.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for all you do and really appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Have a great one.
Thanks.